Starting off this countdown, we have Clifford Olson. This dude was a very controversial and well-known serial killer here in Canada. In fact, he was given the name the Beast of BC. He took the lives of 11 individuals in the early 1980s. Now, over the course of his life, he had a number of run-ins with the law and was put behind bars a number of times when he was a teen. His first victim was Christine Weller, who disappeared and was later found on Christmas Day. She had been stabbed and strangled. Now, what makes his case so controversial was when he was caught, he made a deal with the RCMP. The deal was basically he would get paid for telling them the location of his victims' bodies. He got $10,000 for each victim, and then he would send the money to his wife and son. But imagine that, getting paid for your murders. They literally were rewarding him, which makes me sick to my stomach. In our 9th spot, we have Dr. Kitty, but don't be fooled by this doctor's name. She's not cute or friendly. Now, Dr. Kitty's real name is Jingwei Wang. She would perform plastic surgery out of her Toronto basement under the name Dr. Kitty. The thing is, she was only 19 and had no license to do such procedures, let alone did she have any proper training. She posted flyers around the city saying she does face slimming injections. In April of 2017, she got a couple of clients. One client had her face become botched from the injections after getting a massive infection. Needless to say, she was arrested and charged. In our 8th spot, we have Richard Chase, aka the Vampire of Sacramento. Why was he given this name? Well, because he was an American serial killer who would drink the blood of his victims before feasting on their bodies. It is said that he took the lives of 6 people in just 1 month in 1977 and 1978. Apparently he did this though because he thought the Nazis were turning his blood into powder through some poison, and he needed to drink other people's blood to prevent that or to counteract it. I don't know what he was thinking, but either way, he was a pretty scary dude. In our 7th spot, we have Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian was the only female emperor in China's history, but she was a ruthless one at that. Why? Well, apparently she killed her sister, her older brothers, the ruler, and poisoned her mother. Not only that, but she was known to torture and execute anyone who got in her way. Plus, she was known to force people into taking their own lives. Even animals had to fear her. This is what she said about taming a horse, and I quote, "First I'll beat it with the iron whip. If it does not yield, I'll hit it with the hammer. If it still won't be tamed, I'll cut its throat with the knife." So that right there gives you just a perfect insight into the woman that she was. Moving on to number 6, we have Jack the Ripper. Of course, you have probably heard about Jack the Ripper or Jill the Ripper, since people think that it could have been a female serial killer and maybe that's why she was never caught, because all this time they were looking for a man, you know? Meanwhile, she was a woman. Anyways, Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer in London in 1888. To this day, they have never been caught. Obviously, they are probably deceased by now. Anyways, the killer would typically target women of the night who would work in bad areas in the East End of London. Some of the victims had their organs removed, and the way in which they were removed made detectives think that the killer had some anatomical or surgical knowledge. Either way, it's believed that Jack took the lives of at least 5 women, but the number could potentially be higher. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Issei Sagawa. This guy's story makes me sick to my stomach. So on June 11th, 1981, Issei Sagawa invited his friend over for dinner. Little did she know, she was going to be dinner. He ended up shooting and killing her and then began to feast on her body over the next couple of days. Apparently, he always had the urge to eat the body of a beautiful woman. 32 years he fantasized about this. In fact, he says that what he did was natural and he wants to do it again. And what's horrifying is that he can if he really wanted to, because he's a free man. So this all took place in France. When he was presented in front of a judge, he was ruled legally insane and unfit to stand trial. So they dropped the trial and sent him back to Japan with the order to be placed in a mental institution. But he didn't. Since the charges in France were dropped, the court documents were sealed, so the Japanese authorities couldn't get him. So they had no case against him and he just walked free. Not only that, he became a minor celebrity in Japan. He appeared on talk shows and did interviews, and literally made a living off of his gruesome deed. I think the fact that he's still out there and can strike again at any moment makes him absolutely terrifying. In our fourth spot, we have Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. You're getting 2 for the price of 1 for this countdown number, so you're welcome. These 2 men worked together to commit some horrific deeds. In particular, they built a bunker, would kidnap families, and then bring them to this bunker to torture. They took the lives of 25 or more individuals. In particular, they would target women. If the women had a family, they would kill the family but keep the woman alive in the bunker. And sadly, they would take advantage of them. Sometimes they even would videotape them doing this. In the end, the pair were caught shoplifting, and when their van was explored, they found bullet holes and blood in the back, so they were caught and arrested. Moving on to number 3, we have the Toy Box Killer. David Parker Ray was an American kidnapper and serial killer that took the lives of more than 50 women. Now, he was referred to as the Toy Box Killer because the women were placed inside of this soundproof trailer filled with a number of torture devices. He referred to this as his toy box. He would then kidnap women, bring them back there, and use whips, medical instruments like saws, clamps, etc., sexual toys, and electric shocks to torture them. But before doing so, he would play a very creepy recording to the women. The recording talked in detail about what he was about to do to them. So he would psychologically torture them before physically torturing them. Thankfully, one of his victims escaped and was able to tell the police about David and his crimes. In our second spot, we have Carl Tanzler. Okay, this dude was another sicko. But basically, he was a radiologist that fell in love with his patient, Maria Elena, who was dying of tuberculosis. But that didn't stop him. Carl ended up digging up her corpse when she died and then fixed her body. He replaced her eyes with glass eyes and used wax and wires, among other stuff, to fix her dead body and face. He then kept her inside of his house and would sleep next to her dead body at night. Of course, it would smell, but he would spray her with perfume and rub her with oils. It took people 7 years before he was caught and people realized what he had done. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Armin Moose. Now, this one is quite the weird story. In 2001, a man named Bernd Brandes posted online saying he was in search of someone who would be willing to cook and then eat him. That's when a man named Armin Moose responded to that ad. The two then arranged how this was gonna go down. When the two met up, Brandes got drunk and took a lot of painkillers before being killed. Armin then ate his body over the course of the next couple of months. Apparently, there was even a video of him doing this, and I'm sorry for all the people that had to watch it because apparently the people who did see it said it was so disturbing that they sought psychological counseling after. Armin was arrested in December of 2002 after posting another ad explaining what he would do to willing participants. Starting off this countdown, we have Richard Kuklinski. Richard Kuklinski, otherwise known as the Iceman, was an American serial killer who was convicted of 4 murders in 1988 and another in 2003. But after his arrest, he admitted to killing at least 100 more. Now, he was given the name the Iceman because he would place his victims in freezers after he took their lives, and then he would leave them in the freezers for years. Then afterwards, he'd dump the body. That way, investigators would have a hard time figuring out the time of death. His first victim was a neighborhood bully. Richard took his life when he was just a teenager. From there, he was kinda like, oh, I like the feeling of killing, and that's what started his killing spree. In our 9th spot, we have Dorangel Vargas, aka the Hannibal Lecter of the Andes. He was given this name because over the course of 2 years, Vargas took the lives of at least 10 men in Venezuela. To make matters worse, he would eat his victims as well. So Vargas was homeless. He would find his victims by hunting down passerbys. He typically would target healthy males like athletes. He said he would avoid bigger individuals because of high cholesterol levels. He also thought they had contaminated flesh, whatever that means. Once he locked his eyes on his next target, he would bludgeon them with metal tube scraps or rocks. Eventually, he was arrested, and during his confession, he said, and I quote, "I used to eat the thighs, not the nose, ears, or hands, because they're too hard. If I saw a drunkard sleeping, I would kill him with my spear. I want to go back there and dig a big hole to bury them. I don't feel ashamed of anything. They have put me in jail for nothing. Okay, buddy, for nothing, eh? Yeah. Okay there, bud. In our 8th spot, we have H.H. Holmes. Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, or H.H. Holmes, was an American serial killer back in the 1880s. In 1886, he moved to Chicago and got a job as a pharmacist under the name Dr. H.H. Holmes. However, he was killing people in order to steal their property. He also got his employees to write him down as a beneficiary so that he would get all their money after he killed them. And then he would sell the bodies of his victims to medical schools. On top of that, he owned a house that was referred to as the Murder Castle. Basically, his home had secret passages, trapdoors, soundproof rooms, gas chambers, and a kiln to cremate the bodies. That's why they called it the Murder Castle, because you get murdered and it was so big like a castle. Eventually, he admitted to 27 murders, however only 9 were confirmed. Yet officials believe he killed closer to 200 individuals. Moving on at number 7, we have Charles Cullen, and in no shape or form is he related to the Cullen family from Twilight. This guy is sick though. He was a nurse in New Jersey for 16 years, but instead of helping his patients, he would kill multiple of them. He did so by giving them too many meds so that they would OD, or by contaminating their IV fluid bags. It's believed that he took the lives of 40 patients, but in his interviews post-arrest, he admitted to killing many more. It's crazy, but investigators think that his kill count is around 400. Now you might be like, how does one nurse kill that many patients and no one looks into these things? Well, this guy was stealthy. If people started to raise an eyebrow, he would move on from that hospital and get a job at another. Plus, during this time there was a nurse shortage, so hospitals were desperate. Finally, in 2003, the hospital was suspicious of him because his patients kept overdosing, and that's when he was caught. And now I'm scared of receiving any kind of treatment, thanks. In our 6th spot, we have Joseph James D'Angelo Jr. Joseph was a former police officer who you might know better as the Golden State Killer. But he has many other names like the Visalia Ransacker or the original Night Stalker. It first started in the late 1960s. Joseph would lurk around neighborhoods at night and break into homes. He is responsible for over 85 burglaries and 1 death during a burglary gone wrong. In 1976, Joseph took it up a notch. He then would attack and take advantage of a number of individuals. It's said that he did this to around 50 women. Then he went on to his Night Stalker phase, where he would go around killing innocent individuals. In the end, he committed at least 13 murders and 120 burglaries in California from 1974 to 1986. But like I said, he was best known for being the Golden State Killer. He would attack couples in Northern California and the California coast, tie them up, take advantage of the female, before taking the lives of both. In the end, he was caught after investigators found his DNA at multiple crime scenes. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Robert Hansen, otherwise known as the Butcher Baker. He was an American serial killer who between 1971 and 1983 abducted and murdered at least 30 women. He was given the name the Butcher Baker because he came from a family of bakers. His parents owned a bakery in town and, he would butcher up his victims. He would target young sex workers or topless dancers. He would abduct them and then free them into the woods so he could literally hunt them as they ran away from him. Hansen was actually arrested twice in 1972, once for the abduction of a woman and a second time for taking advantage of a lady of the night. But it wasn't until 1973 that his whole violent spree began. It's absolutely disgusting what he would do to these women. He even kept a map of where he buried all of his victims' bodies. Thankfully, in 1984 he was caught and sentenced to 461 years plus life in prison without parole. Moving on at number 4, we have Rosemary and Fred West. Rosemary West was an English serial killer who took the lives of at least 10 women between 1971 to 1987. She did so with the help of her husband, Fred West. Their first victim was a young woman named Anne McFall. She was a nanny to Fred's child from his previous marriage. According to Fred, he had an affair with Anne and even got her pregnant. Then all of a sudden, in May of 1967, she disappeared. Later, her remains were found close to Fred's home. The second victim was Catherine Costello, who was Fred's previous wife. She mysteriously disappeared in 1971. Later, her remains were found close to where Anne's remains were buried. Over the next 6 years, they took the lives of at least 8 young women. In 1995, Rose was sentenced to life in prison. In our third spot, we have Maxim Petrov. Maxim Petrov was a Russian doctor who took the lives of at least 17 patients. That's what gained him the name Dr. Killer or Dr. Death. So this dude would show up at his patient's home unannounced, usually when he knew their caregivers would be gone for the day. He then would check their blood pressure and be like, "Oh, you need an injection." He then would put them to sleep and go around their homes stealing their possessions. When he first started out, his victims wouldn't die. They would just wake up all groggy and they'd be fine. But in 1999, that's when he started killing. This was his 13th robbery. After putting the patient to sleep, he went around stealing things. But he was interrupted by one of the patient's family members, so he ended up stabbing her and then strangled the patient. That's when his method changed. He decided to inject his victims with a lethal mix of drugs. The mix was a random concoction so that police would think that the killer had little medical knowledge. He then would set the homes on fire to destroy any evidence. But eventually police did catch on to him and arrested him in January of 2000. In our second spot, we have Robert Pickton, aka the Pig Farmer Killer. He was a Canadian serial killer and pig farmer, hence why he was given the name the Pig Farmer Killer. So Robert would lure his victims to his farm, typically they were prostitutes, and then he would tie them up, kill them, and then run their bodies through a wood chipper. The remains were then fed to his pigs. Others were mixed in with pork and sent to friends and family for them to cook and eat. BRB, I'm just gonna go barf real quick. In the end, he was on trial for 6 counts of murder, but was suspected for at least 26 others. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Luca Magnotta. This case shook us Canadians. It's just so disgusting, and if you haven't heard of it, buckle your seatbelts because it's gonna be a wild one. On May 24th, 2012, Luca Magnotta invited Jun Lin to his apartment. He then proceeded to tie him to the bed and stab him to death. He recorded Lin's gruesome murder and later uploaded it online for everyone to see. He titled it "One Lunatic, One Ice Pick." The video was very gruesome. It showed Luca doing awful things to Lin's body. He also ate parts of his body on camera and dismembered his whole body on camera. The video ended up going viral and Luca fled. But before doing so, he mailed Lin's body parts all around Canada. His torso was mailed to an apartment complex in Montreal, his feet were sent to Ottawa, and another body part was sent to Prime Minister Trudeau, but that was intercepted before it even reached him. The craziest thing of all, Luca did this all for attention. He just wanted to be famous. How sick is that? I warned you, it's gross.
Alright, we're gonna be kicking off this list with Jeffrey Dahmer. This is one of the most twisted criminal cases that you can learn about. Jeffrey Dahmer was a serial killer throughout the United States in the 1980s. He would lead men back to his hotel room or to his home, and these men thought they were going back to Dahmer's place for some good old-fashioned sex, but unfortunately they were about to get gruesomely murdered. Dahmer would drug these men, then strap them down to chairs, and then proceed to drill holes in their head and inject chemicals into their brain. It wasn't the drilling they were hoping for. He would record all this information in a diary, as if he was doing some sort of science experiment. He would also keep their body parts. When the police searched his home, they found a pasta pot full of human penises. They also found the skulls of his victims. Dahmer would keep them and decorate them. He would have like a little arts and crafts session. I'm not sure why he would do something like this. I don't know if maybe he was trying to sell them afterwards, but I feel like the resale value on skulls is really low. There's speculations that he would also eat the people, and that's how he was coined the name the Milwaukee Cannibal. After he was convicted, he was sentenced to 900 years in prison, and it didn't take long for the inmates to turn on him. After a few years, he was murdered in jail. At number 9, we have Leonid Minin. Some people want to make money and be rich, and they don't care who they have to step on to get it done. Leonid Minin is one of the most notorious arms dealers of all time. He sold weapons to people all throughout Africa, including the Liberian president Charles Taylor. This man helped fuel turmoil throughout Africa. His distributions of weapons led to thousands of deaths and children being ripped from their families to become child soldiers. Minin was a massive partier as well. He was known to indulge in in drugs and prostitution. If you're an international arms dealer selling illegal weapons, I don't think you're gonna have a moral stance against paying for sex. That's like Jeffrey Dahmer being fine with eating people but not touching pork because it's too cruel. Eventually this man's crimes caught up with him and he was arrested. When he was arrested, he had over $500 million in goods on him. At number 8 we have Mokhtar Belmokhtar. This man is head of the African branch of Al-Qaeda known as Al-Murabitun. I bet you thought these guys were eradicated. Well, apparently they just won't die. They're like cockroaches, but they know how to use social media. Belmokhtar isn't just hiding in the shadows either. With all the other attacks going around the world, it's obvious that we don't get to hear about some of the lower tier terrorists making moves. But in 2014, he tried to pull off a terrorist attack on the Eiffel Tower, and the guy is a master of building his own bombs. Well, kind of a master. He did blow off one of his own eyes with a homemade explosive. Now he's like one of those eye patch dudes, which kind of makes him even scarier. His entire plan is to build an army of mercenaries in Africa and mobilize them, and then start attacking the Western world. So far most of his attempts have been foiled, but it's still terrifying knowing that there's another Osama bin Laden wannabe trying to bring Al-Qaeda back to its former glory. And I use the term glory loosely. At number 7 we have Enedina Arellano Felix. She is known as the first ever female drug lord in Mexico. She's head of the Tijuana branch of the cartel, and this lady moves bricks and kills everyone. This section of the cartel was run by her brothers originally, but one by one they all fell, either being killed or arrested. After all the male figures were separated from the business, it was up to Enedina to step up and take control. Oh, and did she ever! She has a background in accounting, and through her business knowledge, she moved Tijuana's cartel back into a position of being one of the most powerful in all of Mexico. Not only that, but after she came into power, the murder rate in Tijuana rose by 37%. You have to crack a few eggs to make an omelet. And by crack eggs, I mean shoot people down in the streets in cold blood, and make an omelet, I mean spread cocaine throughout North America. At number 6 we have Moses Sithold. If you're into serial killers, then this one might have slipped under your radar. He's not often talked about, but is known as one of the most brutal serial killers to ever plague South Africa. His total time as an active serial killer is a little blurry, as all the murders linked back to him took place in just over a year, from July of 1994 stretching all the way to November of 1995. Moses was a predator who would lure his victims to secluded areas, rape them, and then murder them. In that short time frame of carnage, he was able to kill 38 people. This is why the total time of him as a serial killer is a bit blurry. It's unlikely that he was only active for the year and killed that many people. There might have been murders prior to that nobody was able to link back to him. He was able to avoid detection by jumping from town to town, with his killing spree stretching over 3 different cities. After he was caught, he was sentenced to 2,000 years in jail. Something I really like about his sentence is that he has the opportunity for parole after 1,000 years. This guy better start injecting liquid kale if he ever hopes to live that long. At number 5 we have Amado Castillo Fuentes. Fuentes is easily one of the most powerful criminals who has ever lived. He was the former leader of the Juarez Mexican cartel. This guy made his way to the top through blood and cocaine. Chances are if he did cocaine anywhere in the 90s, it passed through this guy's organization. He was given the nickname Lord of the Skies because of all the planes he owned to transport his drugs. His cartels killed thousands of people, and they worked super hard to make Fuentes one of the richest criminals who has ever lived. Of course, all of the money he made is off the books, so it's hard to tell how much he was actually worth. It's not like drug lords are into filling taxes out. You don't extort a small business for all their money and then ask them for a receipt with it. But it's estimated that his worth was $25 billion. He died in 1997, and it wasn't the feds or the CIA or a cocaine overdose to bring him down. He actually died from complications with surgery. Fuentes was having plastic surgery to help him hide from the people hunting him down, but the doctor couldn't pull it off. I wonder what happened to the doctor after he accidentally killed one of the biggest drug lords in history. Yeah, he probably died. At number 4 we have Gilles de Reyes. We are going to venture back all the way to the 1400s for this psychopath. Gilles de Reyes was originally a celebrated member of the army of Joan of Arc. After his military time, I guess the taste for blood was still in his veins, but he wanted to focus on easier prey. De Reyes would start to target young boys. He would lure them back to his castle, telling them he had sweets and other goodies to give them. After he brought them back to his lair, he would mutilate and torture them for hours. It's said that he gained the most pleasure from bathing in their blood. What he would do is slice open their throats and let the warm blood pour over his body. I heard it's great for your skin. Another sickening kernel of information is that his servants were all aware of what he was doing. They would help de Reyes get rid of the bodies after after by burning them. I guess back in the 1400s, good servant work was hard to come by. Some people were like, I get my paycheck, I go home, no questions asked. I mean, I don't want to burn these kids' bodies, but I also don't want to update my resume. At number 3, we have Pablo Escobar. I can't imagine too many people don't know who this guy is. There's movies about him, songs about him, Netflix made Narcos, and not to mention an enormous amount of literature. Pablo Escobar was one of the largest drug lords who has ever lived. He operated out of Colombia and single-handedly gave the country the reputation it has today for being a cocaine mecca. During his reign, he was famous for bribing anyone who stood in his way, and if he couldn't bribe you, he would probably just blow you away with a car bomb. He became one of the richest men who has ever lived. During the height of his power, his men were spending $1,000 a week just to buy rubber bands to wrap up the massive amounts of cash that they had. At number 2, we have Jesus Ernesto Chavez. Some people are made for certain types of work, and even though this guy is probably one of the most horrible people to ever walk the earth, he was still very good at his job. Chavez was a hitman in Juarez, Mexico. He mainly worked for the Barrio Azteca gang, and while he was on trial, he admitted to killing over 800 people. See what I mean? Horrible person, but definitely employee of the month. And if you're wondering how he racked up numbers like that, well, he wasn't just killing gang members. Chavez was ordered to kill 8 civilians a day, every day, just to keep the city on edge. This guy's kill-death ratio is unbelievable. And for the number 1 spot, we have John Mongrel. I couldn't imagine a worse fate than getting sent to a prison in South Africa. And if you were so unlucky that you would be given this horrible fate, then John Mongrel would make sure that your time there would be hell on earth. He's one of the generals of the Numbers Gang, a ruthless gang in South Africa where each person is given a number that breaks down which division they belong to. For instance, the 27s are in charge of killing prison guards. The 26s are in charge of handling money. John Mongrel's head of the 28s, who seek out and kill enemy gang members. John Mongrel was sent to prison for murder when he was only 14 years old. Once inside, he joined the gang and has been on an endless killing spree ever since then. He claims to have killed over 1,000 people. There are small towns with less people living in them than that. And I think this guy has killed more people in real life than I have killed in all the virtual video game playing I have played over all my gaming years. After famous sprinter Oscar Pistorius was sentenced to prison, John Mongrel said that if he was sent to his jail, he would kill him because he didn't want him to think he was gonna get an easy ride in prison because of his status. I can't think of a harder ride than someone murdering you.
Number 10. H.H. Holmes. I've talked about H.H. Holmes before on this channel. Can you guess which video it is in the comments? Let me know. But some of you requested that he be in part 2, and considering his likeness to Hannibal, I completely agree that he has to be. Like the fictional killer, Holmes was handsome, charming, and could woo any woman who met his eye. Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, again, no relation to Sherlock Holmes, though he changed his name out of admiration. You know, he should have said Lecter because he's so close to him. Anyways, like Hannibal and Sherlock Holmes for that matter though, he was a genius. He finished school at the age of 16 and earned his doctorate in medicine by the age of 23. In fact, as a child, he showed an interest in medicine by practicing surgery on animals, and we all know what happens after that. Additionally, in medical school, he got into the habit of stealing corpses and conning insurance claims. Yeah, cool guy. But he isn't famous for any medical marvels, oh no. By the late 1800s in Chicago, Holmes eventually earned enough money to construct a massive labyrinth within a hotel of sorts. It had stores on the bottom and apartments above, each level booby-trapped with trapdoors, disorienting mazes, and chutes that would drop victims into the basement where vats of acid, very Joker-like, which was used for decaying corpses, and a crematorium lay where he would, you know, get rid of the evidence. Holmes' House of Horrors would soon be infamously known as the Castle. Like his old medical school days, he also took out insurance policies on his victims to fund his macabre endeavors. Historians still debate how many people he killed exactly, but currently it sits around 200. Number 9, the killer actor. Though many of us carry some heavy torches for actors we've seen on TV, now imagine that actor used their talents for evil, not entertainment. Ramiro Artieda was a Bolivian sex criminal responsible for the deaths of over 8 women between 1937 and 1939. In traditional serial killer fashion, all of them had an uncanny resemblance to each other. The reason he's called the killer actor is due to the fact that he used the acting training he received while studying drama in the US to lure his victims. He created characters and drew women to secluded areas where he would perform his crimes. He played a monk, a film producer, and a professor. Before he left for the States, however, he was also accused of killing his younger brother, Luis, when his family estate passed solely to him, and his fiancée left him due to the allegations, so he was a bit heartbroken. So when he returned from Bolivia, his goal was to eradicate anyone who looked anything like his ex-fiancée. Rough. Thankfully, his crimes were cut short, and he was sentenced to death in July 1939. Number 8, William Devon Howell. Some people have cool names for their cars like the Batmobile or Knight Rider. Howell thought it'd be cool to name his 1985 Ford Econoline the Mobile, and that just about says it all right there. William was already in jail for the murder of Nilsa Arizmendia after she was last seen getting into his van in 2003. Blood was found in his mobile, but she wasn't the only one of his victims. Police discovered 3 bodies on a desolate stretch of land in 2007, all linked to Howell. But his body count rose in 2015 when 4 more bodies were discovered behind a Connecticut strip mall on the same stretch of land where they found the 3 others. Police linked them to Howell after hearing his confession to another cellmate about his garden, which is where he buried his victims. He was also notorious for sleeping next to his victims while they decomposed in his car. Though he doesn't sound anywhere close to a genius like the infamous Hannibal, there's something so disturbing about these lonely murders committed by a drifter in Connecticut. What was it about him that made these women trust him enough to follow him into his car? Number 7, the Great Blood Sorceress. First off, why do we give such epic names to murders like Jack the Ripper, the Zodiac Killer? Like, what? Now the Great Blood Sorceress? Like, damn. It seems like we're celebrating these people, but we're not. We're not. I don't know. Hi, my name is Rachel Fisher and welcome to my existential crisis. Anyways, Magdalena Solis, aka the Great Blood Sorceress, was a religious fanatic turned serial killer who plagued the minds and bodies of Mexico. She joined the Santos and Cayetano Hernandez cult in 1963 and started having warped visions of grandeur and a marked sexual perversion, which led her to do a lot of stuff I can't say out loud because YouTube gets mad. With the cult, they moved to Yerba Buena, which had a population of around 50 people, all poor and starving, and convinced them they were gods. While the brothers knew it was fake, Magdalena went hardcore method in her role as the priestess and believed the whole thing. She was responsible for 8 confirmed murders, though possible 15, through sacrifices where the victims were tortured and beaten. Afterwards, she removed their hearts and drank their blood. Followers of her group claimed that she was a reincarnation of an Aztec goddess. Sure, I mean, whatever makes you sleep better at night, man. Number 6, Israel Keyes. Israel Keyes was a former soldier who was honorably discharged from the US Army in 2011. But little did they know, Keyes was ready to fulfill a plan he had been waiting for years. Once discharged, he turned his cell phone off, flew to Chicago, and then drove a rental to Vermont. He paid cash for all expenses to avoid leading anyone to his pit, just one of the pits he had planted all over the country. He had buried supplies in a specific area back in 2009, and once there, he picked a random couple and meticulously carried out his dark deed. He killed them. His next victim was Samantha Koenig in Alaska in 2012 and delighted in taunting the family with texts and photographs and debit withdrawals, maintaining the illusion that she was still alive. Keyes followed no pattern, killed at random, which made it incredibly difficult to catch him, but eventually he was caught in Texas, confessed to 8 murders, though police suspect there were definitely more. They just can't find them. Though his attacks may appear random, they were heavily thought out and eerily methodical. It's almost as if he planned his own arrest. He is a horror movie killer brought to life. Never mind Hannibal Lecter. Number 5, Vicki Dawn Jackson. Between December 2000 and February 2001, Vicki Dawn Jackson went on a murder spree, killing as many as 20 people and attempting to kill 5 more. But outside her small town, you have never heard of her. Similar to Lecter, Jackie worked in the medical field of sorts as a nurse in a small town in North Texas. The hospital she worked at suddenly underwent a plague of respiratory-related deaths, but since all the patients who died were elderly, well, no one thought anything of it. No one became suspicious until several vials of methacurium chloride, a drug used to temporarily paralyze a patient's ability to breathe, had disappeared. Investigators narrowed in on Jackson after colleagues recalled that she'd often say she'd take care of unruly patients, then realizing after that Vicky was the last one seen when the patients died, 2 and 2 together. It still took until July 2002 for Jackson to be arrested, even after they found a syringe with traces of the drugs in her garbage. But when she finally went to court, she didn't put up a fuss and admitted to all the crimes. She continues to serve her life sentence, and good riddance. The pain of losing a loved one is hard enough, and the fact that Vicky took so many from their families while in her care is painful to wrap your head around. Number 4, the monster of Ecatepec, Juan Carlos. It's 2018 and a string of murders plague Mexico City, shocking the country. Juan Carlos became known as the monster of Ecatepec for killing over 20 women in the quiet suburb. But he wasn't alone. His wife Patricia was used as a lure to bring his victims back to their house of horrors. The couple would say that Patricia sold cheap clothes, and that was enough to lure the women in. They didn't discriminate against who they took, even claiming young mothers. The two were caught and arrested when authorities found them pushing around a stroller filled with body parts, not a baby. Carlos has even warned police that should he ever be freed, the first thing he will do is kill again. And I hope they listen to him and don't just go, oh, never mind, we'll just release you. Honestly, one of the most chilling ones, and we're not even at the top 3 yet, so get ready! Speaking of which, if you like this list, you know what to do and let us know. Number 3, Fred and Rosemary West. I've got to thank commenter Robert Clark for providing some more leads, including these next 2, so 3 and 2. Fred and Rose West are yet another terrible duo, more terrifying than the singular monster that was Hannibal Lecter. Fred and Rose West might have been a charming couple, a delight at parties, but like most of our most charming killers, it was the perfect facade. The Wests and murdered at least 9 young women, including their own daughters between 1973 to 1987. The majority of the murders took place in their very home. To cover up the frequent burials of their victims, Fred would cover it up by constantly doing home improvements and garden work. The victims who weren't a part of their family would be lured to the house under claim that the family was simply looking for nannies. When they were finally caught, Fred committed suicide while waiting in prison, and Rosemary is still living out her sentence in jail, and thank goodness. Ugh. I can't even go into detail because YouTube gets mad, but what they did was just absolutely horrific. Just a combination of everything horrible. Like everything you could imagine, they did. Yeah. Number 2, the Hammersmith nude killer. So thanks also to that commenter. You thought Jack the Ripper was bad? Well, welcome to Hammersmith nude killer. The most terrifying part is that we still don't know who the killer is, just like Jack the Ripper. It was a peaceful morning in London, 1964, when the first body was discovered, washed ashore on the Thames. This would be one of the 6 victims of the Hammersmith nude killer. Nicknamed Jack the Stripper, as all 6 of the victims were petite, young prostitutes murdered and mutilated in a similar fashion to the infamous killer, except all were dumped naked. Their bodies were found in Kensington, Chiswick, Hammersmith, Brentford, and Ealing, and it is supposed that his kill count reaches above the confirmed number. The killer somehow evaded one of the largest manhunts in all of history, including that of Jack the Ripper. The closest the police ever got was when they discovered the exact area where the perp would store the bodies before he released them. But then, just like that, killing stopped. No trace left to follow. Like the OG Ripper case, there was a large range of suspects coming from a wide span of backgrounds, rich and poor, but still to this day, no one has any clue as to who was responsible. Oh, good God. Now, number 1, it's so gross, guys. First off, I want to say thank you to commenter Somwell C for pointing me in the direction of Albert Fish, but it feels weird to say thanks. Albert Fish claimed to have committed at least one murder in every state in the 1930s and 1934. Mrs. Budd's daughter, Grace, had been missing for quite a while when she received an anonymous letter that read, quote, "Dear Mrs. Budd, on Sunday, June the 3rd, 1928, I called on you at 406 West 15th Street, brought you pot cheese, strawberries, we had lunch, Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her." Unquote. This should give you a very clear idea of the nature of his crimes, because what he said he wanted to do, he in fact did. Albert Fish had many names: the Gray Man, the Werewolf of Wisteria, and the Brooklyn Vampire. Since Fish spent most of his childhood in an abusive orphanage, Fish grew up associating pleasure with pain. Not only would he commit horrendous sadistic atrocities onto others, he would also commit them onto himself. His addiction to pain knew no limits, but was able to hide his mental illness enough to father 6 children with his wife before she eventually left him when the illness became so apparent she couldn't ignore it. He would regularly mutilate himself with nails, needles, and even light his private areas on fire. This he did to his victims as well, and more. If you ever saw him in the street, you'd never think to look twice. He just looked like a regular guy, which is the most terrifying part. There are so many levels to his crimes, which makes Albert Fish oddly make the #1 spot. Number 10, Jack the Ripper. Starting off number 10 with one of the most infamous murderers in history, Jack. Jack the Ripper plagued the minds of investigators for centuries, actually. He committed 5 gruesome murders in 1888 in and around London's Whitechapel area. He taunted police with mysterious letters and has been the hot topic of news stories for over 120 years. Some believe he was part of a conspiracy to do with Queen Victoria, others that he was just simply an insane man. Part of the reason he was so terrifying is that beyond the regular murders, it was more sociopathic and hateful than anyone could understand at the time. I mentioned in a video a while back that they may have solved who the murderer was in 2019. DNA evidence found on the silk scarf of Catherine Eddowes, Jack's 4th victim, identified Polish barber Aaron Kosminski as Gentleman Jack. Splattered blood and semen were found on the shawl, and the DNA was matched to a descendant of Kosminski. Though some scientists still say the evidence is insufficient to officially declare Kosminski as the infamous murderer, that was the closest authorities ever got to catching him. Number 9, John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy put a face to the killer clown. I can't even begin to imagine the horror of discovering what was the real John Wayne Gacy. He was a father, a husband with a very dark secret. The first time he was arrested was in 1968 for committing heinous assault on 2 teenage boys, but was released after 18 months for good behavior. Regardless of his past, Gacy adopted the persona of Pogo the Clown, delighting his community with entertainment. Everyone loved him, and families trusted him, but somehow Gacy got away with destroying the lives of family after family, brutalizing 33 boys, hiding the bodies in his very home. He received the death penalty in 1994, but the fact that he left jail in the first place just goes to show the issues with the criminal justice system around that time. Number 8, Robert Pickton. Presumably, if you're watching this video, you're a true crime fan, and you've probably watched the episode of Criminal Minds. I think it's Criminal Minds, is it? Let me know. Inspired by Pickton. For anyone who thinks Canadians are always nice, not true. Canadian serial killer Robert Pickton owned a pig farm, which he used to his sick advantage. Police initially began a search on his property when they heard about illegal firearms, but soon they began to discover discarded items from women who had gone missing. For instance, an inhaler, an old shoe, and a few more pieces that led to one of the most horrifying murder cases in history. Pickton confessed to the murder of 49 women and said he wanted to make it an even 50 but got sloppy and therefore was caught. Many of the remains were not found due to the fact that he presumably fed the remains to his pigs and even ground up and added the meat to ground pork, which he distributed to family and friends. Anthropologists brought in 2 massive conveyor belts to help sift through dirt in order to find any evidence of the missing women. Pickton was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole, which is the most severe sentence in the Canadian judicial system. Number 7, Andrei Chikatilo. Andrei Chikatilo was a Soviet serial killer who developed an addiction to killing, stating that stabbing women was the only way he could, get ready, receive sexual satisfaction. Like most terrifying serial killers, he was just like everyone else. Andrei worked as a trusted school teacher, all while committing over 50 murders of young people before he was caught. He was able to get away with it for so long due to the USSR covering up potential serial murders, as murder was not supposed to exist under Stalin. At the time of his birth, Stalin's agricultural policies caused widespread hardship and famine. His early childhood was affected by this, and not only that, Andrei was believed to have suffered from water on the brain at birth, causing him to get frequent UTIs and often wet his bed. He was often the subject of bullying due to the fact that his father was captured during World War II and was ridiculed for his cowardice. Though we can be sympathetic towards his childhood upbringing, we cannot be towards his crimes. He was a truly awful man, and Andrei was arrested in the 1990s and sentenced to death. Number 6, the Green River Killer. Like Picton, Gary Ridgway was convicted of 49 murders, however, those are only the confirmed cases. Evidence suggests that the number is over 75. The Green River Killer is one of America's most prolific killers because of that reason. During the 1980s to 1990s, women were warned to stay away from Route 99, South King County, Washington, but still, this stretch was often occupied by runaways and prostitutes, and those that didn't pay attention to the warnings often paid the price. He is one of the reasons parents tell their children not to help someone who's looking for their lost dog or have candy in their truck. Gary would lure women by showing them a picture of his son before strangling them in his home and then moving them towards a forest location. Though Ridgway claimed to be a religious man, he had a weak spot for women of the night. Sadly, some of his victims have still never been found, though authorities have uncovered some since his trial. Number 5, Pedro Lopez. Pedro Lopez earned the name Monster of the Andes, though it's in no way a title to celebrate. His early life in Colombia was rife with homelessness, violence of many kinds, and was incarcerated in his early adult life. But he should have never been let go. His crime spanned across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. Pedro was convicted of killing 110 young women, though the estimate is over 300. It seems that Pedro's crimes could have ceased a lot sooner than they did. In the 1970s, he was caught by the Ayacucho community when he attempted to kidnap a young girl. They were going to submit him to tribal law and bury him alive until a Western missionary convinced them that he should be handed over to the Peruvian police. He was then deported back to Colombia, where his crimes began again. He continued to kill, many families resorting to hunting him down themselves, and he was finally caught once again by Carolina Ramon and her peers when he tried to lure her daughter away during the market. Lopez was incarcerated in 1981 for just 16 years after being diagnosed as a sociopath, and then he was released, and his whereabouts are unknown today. Good job, guys. Number 4, Dennis Rader, aka the BTK Killer. True crime doc fans know this name very well. He is another man who, like Jack the Ripper, loved the notoriety of his crimes. The BTK killed at least 10 people between 1974 and 1991, baffling the police in Wichita, Kansas. BTK stands for Bind, Torture, and Kill, which sadly describes the pattern of his crimes. At night, he may have been a murderer, but during the day, like others on this list, Rader was a devoted family and businessman. After killing his last victim in 1991, Rader went off the map, baffling police even more, making them think he had disappeared. But then, in 2004, around the anniversary of the Otero family, he resurfaced, sending more clues to police, literally handing them proof on a floppy disk that led them to his church. It still wasn't until 2005 he was finally arrested and given 10 life sentences to be served in El Dorado Correctional Facility, and he's still there. Stay there, buddy. Number 3, Richard Trenton Chase, also known as the Vampire Killer of Sacramento, and you can already start to guess why. Chase claims 6 known victims during his life of crime and was a devoted cannibal. He was infamous for drinking the blood of his victims, even mixing it with Coca-Cola at times. Ugh. The signs of what was to come were abundant in his early childhood. He would often wet the bed and delight in drinking the blood of small animals, and every true crime fan knows what comes next. He was in and out of mental institutions most of his life and developed hypochondria from his addiction to hard drugs and alcohol. He was convinced that someone had stolen his main arteries and that his blood was turning into powder. He continued to hunt animals, consuming them raw, and once he was found in a field covered in cow's blood. But of course, he graduated to bigger game, and I can't even say what he did to the victims. It was gruesome, guys. Awful. The police eventually got a lead when a girl he went to high school with ran into him, noticing his sunken appearance and blood on his shirt. He was finally caught and tried to plead insanity. The court denied the claim, which I honestly find is weird because he obviously was insane. But Chase was found dead in his cell from an OD on medication he was given while in prison. Honestly, good riddance, man. Number 2, Delphine LaLaurie. Comment down below if you're a fan of American Horror Story. That show is built on shock factor, but man, there were episodes in Coven about Delphine LaLaurie that I actually couldn't stomach. I don't even think I can finish it yet. This woman was vile, to say the least. On April 10th, 1834, a fire at the LaLaurie mansion broke out in New Orleans, leading to a stomach-churning discovery. Rescuers found a 70-year-old black woman chained to the stove while LaLaurie was trying to save the furniture. She was the one who set fire to the house in order to escape the torture Delphine inflicted on her and others in the house. She led them to the attic, and what authorities found was a kind of medieval evil they had no idea hid behind one of the wealthiest women in town. 7 slaves were tied with spiked iron collars. Lalaurie had been accused of the mistreatment of slaves before when she chased a young girl off a balcony. She was forced to sell her slaves but snuck them back in when she made her family buy them so she could keep them. After the torture chamber was discovered, a town mob gathered around the house protesting that something had to be done about the devil woman, but she never faced any real punishment for her crimes, only death by reputation. She was ruined in society. Boo-hoo. That's honestly one thing about American Horror Stories Coven season that was satisfying, that for one moment, we got to imagine that she did get her comeuppance. Number 1, Alfredo Bally Trevino. Last but not least, we have the man that actually inspired the character of Hannibal Lecter, Alfredo Bally Trevino. For years, people believed that Hannibal Lecter wasn't based on any real monster. They had theories, but they weren't sure. Thank goodness though, but then Thomas Harris finally revealed in 2013 that this was actually not the case. Trevino was a doctor in Mexico who was awaiting a death sentence in prison for murdering and then chopping up his gay lover. Harris became acquainted with Dr. Trevino in the 1960s while working for an American pulp fiction magazine. He was tasked with interviewing another prisoner named Dykes Askew Simmons. Simmons had tried to escape prison and was shot by a guard in his attempt. Trevino performed life-saving emergency surgery on him, and when Harris heard the story, man, he needed to know more about this guy. After a fight, Trevino sedated his partner, slit his throat in a bath, and then methodically chopped up his body. He drove to a neighbor's farm to bury the evidence in a box, but when workers noticed a suspicious grave the next day, an investigation sparked, leading to his arrest. Harris was struck by the man's grace, which reminds us of a certain fictional charismatic murderer. Remarkably, Trevino was released and continued his medical practice, saving lives of the poor until he died. So, I don't know, I guess some good came from evil, but it still inspired one of literature's most terrifying villains, so what do you think, guys?
Number 10, Belle Gunness. Originally from Norway, Belle Gunness was a serial killer who plagued Indiana and Illinois with one mysterious death after another. In the 20th century, Belle killed over 40 people, including members of her own family, and potentially faked her own death. She was never caught. She was very tall, around 250 pounds, and had 3 children who all died on April 27, 1908 when her house mysteriously caught on fire. Gunness was presumed dead, but when they started sifting through the wreckage, the townsfolk made a horrific discovery. They found the bodies of her children, though one headless body that didn't align with Belle herself, so where was she? Many townspeople claimed that relatives had visited her farm and never returned. Another recalled a hired farmhand named Joe Maxon was often seen covering up large holes near the hog pen. They got to digging and soon 40 bodies were discovered, and that was just at this farm. Upon investigation, it was also discovered that she killed all of her husbands and even their daughters and sons they brought with them in order to gain insurance policies. She would also lure men with ads that read, and I quote, "Personal comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County, Illinois, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided with view of joining fortunes. No replies by letter considered unless sender is willing to follow the answer with a personal visit. Triflers need not apply." Yeah. No surprise when belongings of the men who answered her call were found in the pit. Whew. Vicious. Number 9, Rodney Alcala. There's actually a movie coming out about this with Anna Kendrick playing Cheryl.
Bachelor number 1. You're a dirty old man. Take it.
Oh, come on, over here.
Dating is really hard. It's so hard. It sucks. It sucks. It's the worst. And having murders out there really doesn't help. You have to text your friends, let them know where you're going. You could meet a guy who says all the right things, ticks all your boxes, but then he turns out to be Rodney Alcala. During the 1970s, Rodney claimed the lives of 9 women of varying ages, though many suspect the number could be as high as 100. He's still confessing to murders to this day. His method was triangulation, but in most cases he would wait for the woman to regain consciousness before he made the final kill. He would also arrange the corpses in poses, taking photos as keepsakes because he was studying film. And he was a photographer. Whoopee. One of the reasons that Alcala is so famous beyond his murders is because of his appearance on the dating show. Cheryl Bradshaw was the Bachelorette, and thank goodness she wasn't convinced by his disarming charms. Bradshaw said,
quote, "I started to feel ill, he was acting really creepy," unquote. Trust your gut, folks. If it's too good to be true, chances are it is. Number 8, Issei Sagawa. After you hear what this guy did, you will be very shocked to learn that he is free and walking the streets of Japan. In 1981, Sagawa shot and killed his friend Renee Hartfelt, and then he ate her, something he wanted to do for over 32 years. Over a 2-day period, I might add. Like another person we're gonna mention later, he believed that by doing so he could absorb her beauty. Oh, and he also committed, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, you two might get mad at me, but his desires first began upon seeing his classmates' thighs when he was younger and thinking they looked delicious. Eventually that grew into a desire to carry out the ritual of killing a woman, any woman. He did go to a psychiatrist about it, who classified him as highly dangerous, but when his rich father found out, he covered it up and sent him to school in Sorbonne, France, which is where he met Renee. He gained her trust, invited her over for dinner, befriended her, and then, when the time was right, he shot her. He packed up what was left of her corpse into suitcases and took a cab over to a park and dropped them off. But bystanders saw the blood leaking and called the police. He admitted it, flat out, was declared insane, deported back to Japan where he was supposed to stay in a mental institution for the rest of his life, but they declared him sane when he got there, and since the case was dropped in France, he only had to stay for 15 months. He is now free, walks the streets, and says that he still has the same desires, though he wants it to be a Japanese woman, specifically now, so. Number 7, the love slave killers. To say Charlene Williams was intelligent is an understatement. She had an IQ of 160, but she had trouble finding love, as I mentioned, dating sucks, after 2 failed marriages, and that is until she met Gerald Gallego. Together, the two hunted and kidnapped 10 young women who Gerald would sexually torment before they were shot or strangled. They killed across 3 states between 1978 and 1980 until a bystander witnessed an abduction and noted the license plate. Charlene was only sentenced to 16 years while Gerald was put on death row. Charlene made a plea that she couldn't stop Gerald and that it was all him who killed the women. To this day, she insists that she never agreed to any of his plans and that she even tried to set them free, saying, and I quote, "I would have done anything if I could have stopped him. I know I couldn't have stopped him. I tried to stop him," unquote. So jury is still out as to how involved Charlene was with the crimes, but as she has been released from prison, time will only tell if more bodies turn up. And now she's doing charity work, which is great, I guess. Number 6, Dennis Nilsen. Nilsen was born in Fraserburgh and is one of Britain's most infamous killers. He confessed to killing and dismembering 15 young men and dissected their bodies, though it could have been more. When he was finally caught in 1983, police began to link a series of lucky escapes and incidents over the 5 years prior. Had they took them into more consideration, they might have caught him earlier. Nilsen was never okay with his sexuality and chose to manifest his desires in a murderous way. He would befriend these men at pubs and bars, disarming them with friendly discourse before luring them home. There he would kill them and reportedly sit with their corpse before taking them apart in order to dispose of the body. He flushed a lot of the remains down the toilet, but little did he know that would get him caught. A neighbor called the plumber to unblock the drain outside, and lo and behold, that would have been an awful day at work. Like one of the worst. Talk about dirty jobs. He was sentenced to life in prison but reportedly died in agony after surgery complications in 2018. Number 5, Harold Shipman. Like Hannibal, Shipman was a doctor. Though not in the same field, he had the similar lethal intentions as Lecter. Shipman's mother died when he was only 17 and immediately decided that he wanted to pursue a career in medicine. So he attended the University of Leeds and failed his entrance exam once before his placement. He became addicted to the painkiller pethidine and got caught forging prescriptions. Following rehab, he got hired at the Donnybrook Medical Center in Hyde, and it was there that he would take the life of over 260 patients. 260. He would lethally inject them with opiate painkillers and nobody thought anything of it. The local undertaker did notice that Shipman's patients were always found sitting or reclined on a couch or sofa, but still, nothing to worry about. But when Angela Woodruff's mother died, leaving behind a will giving everything to Shipman, she knew. Her mother had just been to see Shipman that day, and were it not for Angela, Shipman may have taken many more lives. No one knows why he did. Perhaps he was trying to avenge his mother's death, or maybe he liked playing God. Either way, the Doctor of Death title suits him pretty well, I think. Number 4, Luca Magnotta. This guy, seriously, almost made the top 3, because to this day, His crimes haunt me. If you've ever watched the documentary Don't Fuck with Cats, then you know his name. Or if you lived in Toronto area, you know his name. I watched it having no idea what it was about, and I still can't shake it. I literally cried for days, and I couldn't wrap my head around the things that he'd done and the things that I saw. Warning, the documentary gets pretty graphic, right Chris? Yes, it does. Scarborough, Ontario native Luca Magnotta started out like most serial killers, killing animals in brutal and public ways. He is a pathological narcissist who would film his graphic crimes and post them on the internet for all to see. First against animals, and then onto bigger game. In May of 2012, he filmed the brutal killing and dismemberment of Chinese Concordia student Jun Lin with an ice pick. He was obsessed with the movie Basic Instinct. Since the first cat video surfaced, internet volunteers had been profiling him online for years and knew what was about to happen before the event itself. He was obsessed with himself, creating fake fan accounts, praising pictures, and editing fake ones with friends. He did everything he could for attention, and the pathway towards his bloody deed is so inhuman. But apparently, he's doing just fine in prison. He even got married recently. Glad you're happy. Number 3. Charles Manson. Yup. You know that name. If you don't, here is why he is on this list. It's one thing to kill someone, or even a bunch of people, but it's a whole other ballgame to convince other people to do it for you. When you Google the word cult, Manson will probably come up front and center. Charles ran a cult in the 1960s known as the Manson family, a group of small but heavily devoted individuals who followed his eccentric religious teachings. His ideas were drawn from science fiction and the occult, and preached that an apocalyptic race war was coming. To bond them together, he ordered them to carry out killings so that they would remain united. Basically, they wouldn't leave because they had something that he could hold over them, I don't know. But the group obeyed, which led to the death of actress Sharon Tate, who was pregnant at the time, Benedict Canyon, Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, Gary Hinman, and Donald Shorty Shea, plus 4 more. Rumor has it the reason he attacked Tate's house was because the music producer who used to live there refused to make a record with Manson. Number 2. Elizabeth Bathory. If you thought Vlad the Impaler was bad, well, yeah, I mean he was. But when it comes to bloodlust, I think Elizabeth Bathory takes the cake on this one. She was born on August 7th, 1560 in Hungary in a prominent Protestant noble family. Her uncle Stephen Bathory was king of Poland, and the rest of her family basically controlled all of Transylvania. She was an untouchable nightmare. She married a war hero named Count Ferenc Nadasny, who gifted her an estate and perhaps the skills in which she used to kill and maim. After he died, Elizabeth took over the estate, and suddenly young women went missing. Bathory became obsessed with the idea of immortality and believed that bathing in the blood of virgins was the key. But she did more than that. She would lure girls to the castle, even daughters of other nobility, in the guise of work or education. Before draining them of their blood, she would slice, stab, sew their mouths shut, leave them out in the cold, cover them in honey so bees would sting them, and she would bite off their flesh from their face and other intimate parts. When she was satisfied, her servants drained the blood into a bath. According to her journal, she killed just around 650 women. 650 women. When she was finally caught, 3 of her servants were executed, but she was simply locked away in her tower for the rest of her days. Dracula can take a seat, for she was the stuff of nightmares. Okay, number 1, guys, and I know you're kind of expecting it to be someone, I think maybe, but I'm not gonna do it. Because we already know about him. And his name rhymes with Rudolph. Number 1, Paul Joseph Goebbels. If you know your World War II history, then you know there was an infamous German leader that led one of the largest atrocities in history. YouTube won't let me say his name for some reason, but you know who I'm talking about. Obviously he would be number 1 on this list, but I remember learning about Goebbels thinking, who really did it? He was able to use propaganda to turn an entire country against one group of people. Some would even argue that he was even better at public speaking than Adolf was. He regulated all the media content of Germany and forced all Jewish artists, actors, musicians, directors, magazine editors into unemployment, ensuring anything that went out presented his leader faithfully and also was anti-Semitic. He staged a public burning of books that were considered un-German. Though Adolf was the figurehead we all remember, it is because of Goebbels that an entire anti-Semitic movement led to the lives of 6 million people being lost. He himself was a fanatic, despite at one time being engaged to a Jewish woman, and all his favorite teachers growing up were apparently Jewish. Maybe he never physically got his hands dirty, but he didn't need to. He had enough people to do it for him. If you're somehow not convinced that he should be number one, then I invite you to picture this. Goebbels was able to convince an entire country to hate, betray, and kill with a few films, speeches, and radio. Imagine what he could have done with social media.